Hey everybody, how's it going? Welcome to another video. My name is Abbie and this is Spend More Time in the Wild, a channel, a platform, a community entirely dedicated to inspiring and empowering people whoop-de-doo, to get outside for the benefit of mental and physical health. Now I am here in the northern Cairngorms. It is a blustery winter's day and I thought what better day than to try out a new tent. Yay! Woo! Yay! So that's what we're doing. This is the Gossamer Gear The Two tent. I really love doing that. I don't know why. It makes me feel like I'm in like the SAS or something. Boom, boom. It's like, yeah, I'm talking about a tent, not time for 2 cups of tea. This is actually an American tent, but it has been loaned to me by a very, very good friend, and I'm very grateful for the time to have a play around with this tent. And the idea of this video is to make a first impressions video. So I've put it up a few times, and I have to say, I keep being rather impressed by how simple it is to put up. So it's an ultralight tent, and we'll come to the weights and the specifications in a little bit. But basically what that means is it's great for trips where you need to keep your base weight down, or the weight that you're carrying down. So if you're long distance backpacking, if you're bicycle touring, if you're horse trekking and you want to keep that weight down, this is a fantastic tent depending on the environment in which you're going to be adventuring in. So it is a single wall tent, which unlike most tents that I'm used to using means it's one piece of fabric. Basically, if I'm gonna just say what I feel right now, it's a giant plastic bag with some strings attached that you can peg out and sleep in, but rather effectively, I have to say. Now I really am used to using 2 skinned tunnel designed tents, which means you've got an inner, you've got an outer, you have a central pole, you peg it out, and it's really, really robust and stormproof, and yeah, like, that's that. Great. What can I say? I'm not here to talk about those. I love those tents. I'm trying to stop myself. But this tent is a single wall design. So it's very common that these tents are heavy in condensation. But what Gossamer Gear have done with a lot of the features in this tent is seek to mitigate the usual problems. They've been quite clever, I have to say. So the main competitor to this tent, or one of the main competitors anyway, is the Z-Pack's duplex. So quite often on these super, super long distance hikes, sort of like the Appalachian Trail, the Pacific Crest Trail, Continental Divide Trail, the Tiora, whatever it is, you'll see Gossamer Gear, you'll see duplex, and a handful of other ultralight tents as well. It's very nice when something like Terra Nova slips in there. They're fantastic English brands. But what's interesting about this Gossamer Gear versus the Z-Packs, one of the main competitors, is that this one retails at pretty much half the price, $320. I don't know what that is in pounds, but $320 compared to around $699 for the duplex is rather interesting. Now I have used the duplex a fair amount. If you're interested to learn more about that, then check out that video, which is linked somewhere in the sphere of this YouTube link. So yeah, it's been really cool playing around with this thing. So Gossamer Gear say that it weighs 667 grams. Now they're a little bit cheeky because that is basically the tent. And then they start to add on the guy lines, the stuff sack, the pegs, the poles if you decide to go for poles rather than your own trekking poles. And then boom, 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 the weight gradually increases. Now what I will say is, fear not, do not panic. This is still a very, very light tent. So I would basically say this tent weighs anywhere between 667 grams and 900 grams if you go for all the swanky features and you just go, stuff it, I'm going to carry it. Now, 900 grams is still a very, very light tent, and I find that highly impressive. So I decided to start this tent review a little bit differently. Normally I show, here's the stuff sack and this is the fabric and these are the pegs. I'm just going to do that with the tent basically. I just needed a wind wall, so yeah. So this tent comes in a very lovely stuff sack. It's got Gossamer Gear branding on it. It's got a little handle on one side and it's got a draw cord on the other. Very nice stuff sack indeed. If you do not want to use your own trekking poles, which you can use to hold this tent up, you can purchase separately these 3-fold, well, tent poles, I guess. I'm sure they have some fancy name, but they're just basically tent poles. So they obviously add a little bit of extra cost, and personally I find them lighter than my trekking poles. They're a bit short to use as trekking poles, would not recommend that. But I actually really like using these trekking pole tents with the poles that you can buy, because like I just mentioned, you can use this tent not just for backpacking. So if you're bicycle touring, it's going to be a bit weird if you're using trekking poles at the same time as bike touring. So you're probably going to purchase these poles. So that's basically to make this video a little bit more user-friendly for the different people that might be looking at this tent. So what was I talking about? Poles. Yes, there are great poles. You need 2 poles, your own trekking poles, or you can buy these 2 poles here. So they don't fit in the stuff sack. They have their own little stuff sack, and you can keep them wherever you want them, because obviously they're a separate purchase. The other thing this tent comes with is 8 V-shaped super light pegs. Now if I ever buy pegs, these are the types of pegs that I love. I rarely buy pegs because I rarely lose pegs, but this tent comes with 8 of them. Now you can pitch it with a minimum of 6, but using all 8 is actually quite a good idea, I feel. And again, given the weight of this tent, like why not? Now the other little nifty thing is you can get even lighter pegs, these tiny little stick pegs, which to be honest I find either bend or snap very easily. But essentially you can use other pegs to peg out the sort of pegging out points of this sort of more meshy fabric on the inside, and what that does is just give you maximum stretch. So on the outside, if we go all pegging points, you've got 1, 2 on the front, 3, 4 on the sides, 5, 6 on the other front, because there's 2 doors, we'll come to that in a minute, and then 7, 8 for the 2 guy lines either side on the front and the back. Not that I know which is the front and the back, but that's how it works. And then you can use these little wee pegs, and I think again there's 6 of these you can use to peg out the inner of the single skinned thing. It's quite confusing. I strongly recommend you try before you buy, if you can, but hopefully this is making sense so far. So basically, that is everything. When it comes to the guy lines, let's start to look at or talk about fabrics now. Obviously, Gossamer Gear have done everything they possibly can to make this really lightweight without compromising on durability, because quite often people purchase these tents because they need it to see them through a rather long trip, adventure, expedition, whatever you want to call it. Now, the guy lines are made out of 1.8mm reflective nylon, and then you've got a 1mm Dyneema core. You've got tensioners on each guy line. You've got the 2 front ones and the main 4 corners. These use ITW line lock tie-outs, which is basically all fancy jargon for the fact that they're made of plastic. You pull them tight, they hold in place. Fantastic. I really don't think there's anything special about the guy lines or the tensioners on this tent, to be honest with you, but it's worth knowing. Some people like to know that it's 1.8mm, so there you go, facts. Let's talk about the actual tent fabric. So this tent currently behind me, if you can't see it, we've got a problem. It's blown away. This is made out of nylon, and it's 10 denier. Now there's a little bit of confusion as to whether the entire tent is made out of 10 denier 1800mm hydrostatic head fabric, or whether the bathtub design, which is essentially the bit that you sleep in, so it's the fabric that goes, that's the floor, and then up the side, so it prevents water entering, whether that's 15 denier. Now, what is denier? What are you talking about? So denier is essentially the density of the weave of fabric. So waterproof coats, for example, generally have a denier of between 50 and even 100 denier. So it's super tight weave. It means it's super robust, very unlikely to snag, and it's going to last a very long time. Now this tent is 10 denier, and I have to say, when I saw that on the website, I was a little bit like, excuse me, 10? Huh? Like, is it like cotton? Yeah, but somehow they make it work. So what I would say is, given the price of this tent, given that it's 10 denier, be careful where you pitch it, because there is quite a chance that it could rip or snag. Now obviously Gossamer Gear have done everything they possibly can to minimise the likelihood of that happening, and it is extraordinarily well made, but do be careful. So whether it's 10 or 15, there's not a lot in it, be careful. Now the bottom of this tent, we've already just mentioned there's a bathtub design. you can buy a footprint for this tent, which makes me laugh a lot because it's just basically like a plastic sheet that you put out underneath it. And every time I try and put it out underneath this tent, it blows away and it's really annoying. But the idea of that is basically it increases the water protection or the water resistancy for this tent. Because to be honest with you, 1,800 millimeters of waterproofing is not a lot, at least for here in Scotland. It's not a lot anyway. So they do call this ripstop nylon, and the kind of clues in the name is supposed to stop rips and be all fanky. That's not even a word. But yeah, honestly, I'm not gonna just like drag it on the floor and test how easy it is to rip because it's not my tent. So yeah, do your own research, folks. But anyway, that's a little bit on the tent fabric, and the only other thing I can really say about the main design here is the seams, essentially where the tent fabric has been stitched together, have all been factory taped, so essentially waterproofed. And it's really nice because a lot of these super light, ultralight tents, you have to do it yourself, and it's not the easiest or nicest job. And I think when you're paying that much money, it's nice to have a tent that you can actually go out and use straight away. So I think that's really, really good. I've heard reports that this tent holds out really, really well in heavy rain, but I personally don't think a Scottish winter will be held off, shall we say, by this tent. Based upon experience, that's my thoughts. So now let's have a look at some of the features. I still don't need to move. It's quite nice, actually. So we've got here the door. Ooh. So there are 2 doors on this tent, and I can't get enough of that. It's a very exciting fact. I'm used to sort of clambering out of this single tiny little door for a 2-person tent and knocking everything over and clum. But with this door, whether you're sleeping it as one person and a dog, or 2 people, you can have your own personal exit and entrance point, and that's quite cool. But it also aids ventilation. But anyway, what you can see is we've got this main guy line. We talked about guy lines. Let's just tension that a little bit more. There we go. So it's a little bit tighter. Now this guy line's a little bit weird because it's actually inside of the door. The door goes over it. And what we'll do is we'll show you. So you have a clip on the bottom of the guy line, and that's where the door clips to in order to stop it fluttering around. And then each side has a slightly different door. So this one on the right, on the front, has got 2 tying off points, which are elastic, really easy to use with gloves. And the one on the left has just got the 1 tying off point. But basically, if we undo these, you'll see the shape of the tent really playing out. It'll get stuck on the guy line. Now, I already mentioned that I am using actual tent poles rather than trekking poles. And the nice thing about using trekking poles is you can obviously adjust the height at which you use this tent. Hang on a minute, can't do this one-handed. I don't know why I'm just like squatting here. There we go. Oh, I can. Never say you can't, folks. Believe you can. Right, then we'll undo this one. Yeah, it honestly is really quite easy. It's nice. Right, so there you see we've got these 2 big flappy pieces of fabric. Whoa-hey. Also, can I just say, I really appreciate this fabric is not completely translucent. A lot of these ultralight tents, it's like you can just see through them. It's quite unprivate. Right, so this one here, as you see on the left, has got a clip, and this clips to the guy line. And that's quite tight now, you can see. So if you've got wind coming through on one side, you can shield yourself and you can cook in that porch. Controversial. And then, if I just leg it over here like this, look, here we go. Now we can see this really, really nice zip, actually. I do like the zips on this tent. They, again, are taped, they're fully waterproof, and you can do that and disappear from the world. Good night. Time for a milkshake. I don't drink milkshakes, I don't know why I said that. Anyway, so the guy line is inside, and I guess I kind of see the point because it's holding this shape, and I think it is clever, but it's also a bit weird. So anyway, the way I have pitched this tent I've basically pulled the fabric right down to the ground. So this would be a really, really good idea to do in snowy conditions to stop the snow being blown up into your tent, especially since the inside of the tent is all mesh. Let's try and protect the microphone. And I've pitched it quite long rather than high. So Gossamer Gear sell this as a tent suitable for tall people, I think is their official statement, which is rather amusing. I don't think I fall into that category, but let me know if you're tall and you like this tent. But what you can see is I have a slight bow in the top. In fact, can you see that? Yeah, just about see that. So you can pitch it so it's a little bit more triangular, so therefore you've got a bit more head height in it. But anyway, this isn't particularly useful because I need to get inside this tent, don't I? Right, welcome to my porch. This is the porch. It's a very nice porch. It's very sizable, I have to say. I really, really like the feature that you can have one side zipped out so that you can just protect yourself from the wind a little bit, because you might have pitched this thing and it's absolutely tipping it down and you just really want to minimize the moisture you take into the tent. So I'm a big fan of a big porch, keeping wet things outside, dry things inside, especially on these longer expeditions that some of us end up doing. Obviously the only thing to think about is if the wind was coming from that direction, so right in front of me, I wouldn't be able to clip this side of the tent door out because that doesn't have a clip on it. So it's only one side on each door, if that makes sense. Hopefully that makes sense. But no, it's a really great porch. What can I say about it? Obviously the fabric itself is going to quite likely get quite heavy in condensation, just because that's quite a common thing with tents, especially this time of year with the different temperatures. But the plus side of the wind is that's going to help blow away any condensation. So the wind is actually our friend when it comes to camping. And then what we can see is, first of all, the pole. Here we go. Ding, ding, ding. And this is where your trekking pole would be. So obviously it's how you position these poles is what's going to determine the shape of the tent. So if I had them more upright, I wouldn't have that bend in the top of the tent, which you can see at the top of the screen there. So yeah, I've pitched it like this and have this as a result. So then you can see this mesh wall. Now this is obviously the tent. This is completely attached to this outer fabric, and that's what makes it a single skin tent, because in a dual skin tent, this inner fabric would be separate. There would be the outer tent, this space, and then the inner attached via almost like micro guy lines. So they really are a different type of tent. And basically what we have here is a door. Let's just get this door open. I'm losing track of all the things I want to talk about. So we can open this door, shooby-dooby-dooby, and get it out of the way. So that's one of our entrance points here. What I can say straight away is I quite like it. It's very light, it's very spacious. Obviously I have two people in here, it's going to be a bit less spacious. But for me, like, I'm quite used to being a little bit like this in my coffin tents. So this is quite luxurious, I have to admit. Again, obviously depending on how you pitch this is going to change the tautness of the fabric. But you can really see what I mean by the bathtub design now. We've got this ground sheet and it comes up slightly on the sides, and that then helps to prevent any running moisture come into this tent. And it's quite nicely demonstrated here behind me as well. So the doors of the tent are made of this extraordinarily transparent like mosquito-proof netting or insect-proof netting, which I think is really cool. So obviously that's going to aid the breathability of this tent and protect you from bitey things. It doesn't even sound as loud as I thought it would in the wind. I find my duplex is very loud in the wind, and it really is hard to put up in the wind as well. I'm not intentionally comparing them, but just seems to be happening. So what you can see behind me is obviously the exact same as the other side, basically. I do have my question marks with the tape seams, because it's not uncommon for the tape to start to come loose. And I know this isn't exactly a new tent, but I can see it in a few places where the taping holding stitching and fabric is coming a little bit loose. I'm not sure if Gossamer Gear actually do a repair scheme, but something like this I would personally not repair too much myself. But yeah, that's certainly worth bearing in mind. But the few things I absolutely love about this is up here. I don't know if you can see this because I can't even see the screen. No, not really. Anyway, whatever. Up here is a tiny like mini carabiner and essentially a clothesline, so you can hang stuff above you, and it actually is above you. Again, I hang things in my tent, and it's just like stinky socks in my face in the morning. And this is like, it's so freaking cool, man. I love it. I'm so excited by a clothesline, and I don't even watch that much. And then other things in here to talk about is we have one pocket either side of the doors, which is quite nice because if you've got two people, you can have your own pockets. And not much else really. I think at this point really the last thing I can do is get out my roll mat, get out my sleeping bag, get out a couple of little bits and bobs, and just show you what that looks like for size. I'll have a little lie down so you can see how well I fit in this tent, and then basically make a decision yourself as to whether or not this is a tent that you would like to use. I have to say, I am I'm rather happy in here. It's quite nice. Alright folks, here we go. So this is my roll mat. You can see where I've just had my knees on it, muddy knees. Oops. I'm not going to lie, I don't have the energy to blow this up right now, but you can see the general shape and size of it and how well it fits. So this is a wide base Thermarest Neo Air. So basically it's a blow up full length mat, and if I just move that out of the way, which is my sleeping bag, and have a little lie down. Wait a minute. Right. So, this is how this looks. I mean, those are my feet. Yep. Looks alright, isn't it? It's quite nice. I mean, I could really be touching that, and that could be tighter. But that guy line's got a little bit of a problem. And you see here what I mean about some of the sort of finishes coming a little bit loose, and that's just literally because it's been pulled tight a few times, and that's how it should be. And it's the same over here. I know it's a little bit dark. Hang on. Bum, bum. Here we go. Let there be light. Hang on. There. You see this is just coming a bit loose as well. So that's all repairable, but it's not ideal, that's for sure. Okay, so having pointed out where my feet were, if I lie down now exactly the same place with my head, you can see that I barely touch the side. I'm touching it a little bit because I'm holding my hat on, because no one needs to see my hat here. But maybe this tent really is suitable for tall people. I don't know. Ugh. I do find that a controversial statement because the doors are really small. I find the doors quite small. You have to suddenly like crunch into a hobbit. I think it would have been cool if the door actually properly came to the halfway point and you could open this whole side. Again, you can see on this side with it unzipped how it's just this kind of like slanted shape, and I don't actually find that a very big door. But easily as a single person in this tent, you could lie down diagonally and not touch the side. Even if the wind is bellowing it a little bit and it pushes in like this, you could still not touch the side. And the reason why I'm emphasising that is just because of the likelihood of condensation. Honestly, even whilst I've just been in here, I can feel the moisture gathering on the fabric, which is very much to be expected. It's not that windy. I suppose another thing that's worth me mentioning is, with this being a single skin tent, if you've got condensation on the inside and water from rain on the outside, it's going to be wet when you pack it away. And when you get it back out, it's still going to be very wet. Now, a little tip here, when you are hiking and if you're just on a hillside and it's a bit windy, even if the air isn't super dry, just hold your tent up and it will air dry. Wind is much better at drying tents than sunshine is, so there's a little side tip. But no, honestly, I think day after day after day of wet day, wet day, wet day, wet tent, wet tent, wet tent, that would drive me a little bit mad. I mean, it does in any tent. But the nice thing about a two-layered tent is you can take down the inner and you can keep that dry and protected. So then you put the outer up, which is wet with condensation and rain, and then you put the inner up, and it sort of keeps you in this bubble of dryness. Because once your sleeping bag starts to get damp, once your roll mat starts to get damp, once your just stuff starts to get damp, it is quite difficult. And I think, you know, if you are pitched somewhere slightly windy, that's going to help a lot with the breathability of this tent and the ventilation of this tent. But that might be something to consider if you don't like being in a wet tent. I mean, truthfully, you know, condensation and the way we use our tents in wet weather is it's not fun for anyone really, and we all have our own ways of dealing with it. I mean, a good friend of mine, she just brings all of her wet stuff into her tent, and she actually shoves it all in her sleeping bag, which she carries a synthetic one, which is rather bulky and heavy, but that's how she does it, so she dries things out with her body heat. I personally would not do that. I try and really keep dry things and wet things separated. I keep things outside of the tent, I keep things inside of the tent, or in the porch rather than outside. And yeah, I I try to keep morale high. I don't like having too many wet things around me. So that's one thing to consider when it comes to I don't know, either a pro or a con of it being a single skin tent. A few more things I can talk about is the ground sheet. I've noticed even since starting filming this, sitting in here, I'm feeling the chill of the ground. It is winter, there has been some snow here, but not for a couple of weeks. This is a very, very thin ground sheet, and that's why you can add the footprints. You can get that piece of plastic you can put underneath. I don't think that's a great idea, personally. I think it's just going to create even more condensation problems. I would just suggest whatever you're using inside, whatever roll mat you're using and sleeping bag, that you make sure it's going to be keeping you warm enough. If you're in warmer climates or using this in sort of spring-summer conditions, you're going to be absolutely fine. But obviously, just be careful what you are pitching it on, because it is so thin, and either 10 or 15, didn't you? So that's definitely something to bear in mind. And actually, for me, I think one of the biggest weak points of this tent is the ground sheet, because that's going to contribute massively to the durability of this tent. So it's quite interesting. As you can see, I'm thinking it's a great tent. And I think my passing thoughts with this tent are, you can make it whatever you want to make it. If you're bike packing, if you're backpacking, if you're doing something else in a hot climate, wherever you are, you can pitch it so that it's got great ventilation. If you're in a cold climate, you can pitch it so that it's got great protection. And I really like that it's got that sort of versatility. I think it's just when you start to get into those slightly harsher terrains that I would generally get a little bit like edgy, I think. Too windy, too rainy, too rocky. Those are the three big ones, I think. Not even too cold. I wouldn't worry about that too much. So yeah, interesting one. But I like that. I like that about this tent. I think it feels fun. And I think it has endless possibilities. So really that's kind of the summary of my first impressions video here. I mean, I've slept in this tent once. I found it really, really comfortable. As I said, it's not too flappy, it's not too wind noisy. So let me know in the comment section below if you have anything else you'd like to add about this tent, if you use it and you want to share your experience. I'm sure there's something I've missed out. There almost always is, it happens. But I'm grateful for you sticking around, and I look forward to hiking with you again very soon. So until the next video, please make sure you like, subscribe and share if you can. And until next time, enjoy your adventures and stay wild. I'll see you soon.